Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we will be having an in-depth look at the land of Astora. It is a place that we have never been to or seen before, but it is a place that many characters call home. Come with me as we rediscover this ancient land, uncover its secrets, learn about its culture, and find out the reason why it faded from the pages of history. Dark Souls tells us about many different places that we never see ourselves. The expansive, warmongering empire of Karthus, the pious land of Karim, the mysterious land to the east, and so on. Astora, however, may be the most varied and well fleshed out among the lot. There are many items that originate from Astora, and we will cover all of them, as well as environmental details to learn as much as we can about this land. I believe it is fitting that we begin with Oscar of Astora, the knight that begins us on our quest in Dark Souls 1. As we rot in the undead asylum, Oscar of Astora kicks a corpse with a key attached into our cell, allowing us to free ourselves from captivity. This act shows us quite a bit about the natives of Astora already. By doing this, Oscar illustrates to us that the world of Dark Souls is not without its merciful beings. An undead husk expects no charity, no aid from the outside world, yet Oscar lends a hand, despite the danger it would put him in to do so. He puts his faith in us to act righteously, and it is through this action that we feel obligated to help him back should the opportunity present itself. Oscar's armor and weaponry gives us an understanding of his native land, and is a good beginning for our own investigation. The Astora Straightsword has a description that reads, "Straightsword of an unknown knight, likely one of Astora's superiors. High quality weapon with a powerful blessing." The sword, which we will discuss in a moment, is used by Oscar along with a crest shield, which has a description that reads, "Shield of a nameless knight, likely a high-ranked knight of Astora. One of the enchanted blue shields, the crest shield greatly reduces magic damage." The sword and shield tell us quite a lot. Oscar, from this, is surmised to be a knight of some importance, described as both a superior and highly ranked. Despite this, he is also unknown and nameless. What does this mean? Well, it could mean several things. It could simply mean that the shield away from its owner makes it hard to identify, but I don't believe that's true. As we will continue, it will become more apparent that Astora is a kingdom that has fallen into ruin as a result of the undead curse and other factors, which has led to many of its higher-ranking members being forgotten in name, and the only thing indicating their status being the craftsmanship of their possessions. This shield bears a crest, possibly that of Astora as a whole, or possibly just Oscar's family crest. I say this only because there are other shields from Astora that bear different crests, indicating that it might have been a land governed by several wealthy families rather than under a traditional monarchy. To add to this, there is a facial preset in Dark Souls 1 called Astora Noble, which has a description that reads as "handsome face of the refined, common in Astora," which implies that Astora has a large ruling class. It is worth mentioning as well that these pieces of equipment are enchanted as well, something that should not be considered as a given for all societies in Dark Souls. While there are many enchanted weapons, there are equally many that must rely on their sturdiness of the steel, rather than their magical enchantments. We encounter Oscar again shortly after beginning the game, when he is mortally wounded and near death. Before we discuss his dialogue, I believe we should have a look at his armor set, the Elite Knight set. It has a description that reads, "Armor of a nameless knight, perhaps an elite knight of Astora, based on the fire-warding heraldic symbol on its blue surcoat. Although he was loath to give up on his undead mission, he perished at the undead asylum and went hollow." The description again speaks of no name in particular, but comments on the heraldry and Oscar's failure. The heraldry itself is difficult to make out due to it being partially covered by a strap of leather, though we can see it clearly enough to understand that it is not the same crest on the shield. Personally, I am unsure as to what the symbol is, but feel free to let me know what you think it is. The gear is rugged and well put together for a travelling knight, no doubt supplied to Oscar for his long journey. We understand more about Astora by listening to his dialogue.
"Oh, you. You're no hollow, Thank goodness. I'm done for, I'm afraid. My insides are damaged. I'll die soon, then lose my sanity. I can feel it coming. I wish to ask something of you. You are a godsend to come at this moment. You and I, we're both undead. Hear me out, will you?
I don't want to discuss Oscar's questline that much, so instead I'll be looking at the elements that help us understand Astora as a whole. Oscar says to us straight up that he is undead. To most of us that might just seem like background detail, but the fact that Oscar is both undead and understands the hollowing process illustrates to us the relationship that Astora has to the undead curse. In all likelihood, the undead curse has ravaged Astora like so many other locations. Something important to note is that Oscar does not accept this fate with apathy, but instead wishes to fight against it, and we learn that he is aware of the prophecy to link the first flame. He states,
Regrettably, I have failed in my mission, but perhaps you can keep the torch lit. There is an old saying in my family, Thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know.
Oscar's awareness of the curse and the prophecy of the chosen undead is not limited to himself, but extends to his family as well, to a point that it has become somewhat mythic among Astora nobility. For this to have cemented itself in Astora culture makes me believe that the quest has become something like a legend over time, a responsibility as well as a necessity to complete. As some of us know, Oscar has a cut questline that essentially runs in parallel to yours throughout Dark Souls 1, but it does not really inform us much about Astora, so we'll park that for now. Let's move on. After arriving at Firelink Shrine, the next immediate native of Astora that we can meet is Anastasia. Anastasia is a firekeeper, a being who has the power to channel souls into the undead, making them stronger. As we know, it is the responsibility for firekeepers to aid undead on their quest to link the first flame, a human practice that allows the gods to maintain their ailing reign over the world. Anastasia is an interesting character, and helps us understand Astora to a further degree. It is confirmed through the Crestfallen Warriors dialogue that Anastasia seems to have fallen victim to a brand of mob justice, when he says,
She's mute and bound to this forsaken place. They probably cut her tongue out back in her village, so that she'd never say any god's name in vain. How do these martyrs keep chugging along? I'd peter out in an instant.
This tells us that Astora is not only a land of noble, well-equipped knights, but also a land of varied wealth and smaller, less well-off villages. If Astora lived by the way of white, the religion that worships and reveres Gwyn and his kin, then this event is illustrative of the fanaticism such institutions within Dark Souls can inspire. Anastasia seems to have been given this duty as a punishment since she is unable to leave her cage, a prison that prevents her from escaping. Who put her there is anyone's guess, but she accepts her fate for the most part and does not wish to be freed, even after regaining her ability to speak, but we will get to that shortly. Anastasia wears the dingy robe set, which have a description that reads, worn by the firekeeper at Firelink Shrine. It is thought to have once been the white robe of a maiden, but smoke and ashes from bonfires darkened it over the years. It is from this we learn that Anastasia may have once been a travelling maiden just like Rhea of Thurland, but those days are long gone. These maidens were tasked with different duties, all in service of the Way of White, and occasionally their escorts were given their own separate missions. Maidens are intensely devout and valued, but it would seem that they are also held to extreme scrutiny. The blood-stained skirt, which belongs to Anastasia, may tell us even more about Astora's disturbing fanaticism. It has a description that reads, it is thought to have once been the white skirt of a maiden, but its true origin is lost in patches of blood. Perhaps its former wearer was maimed to prevent escape. I'll leave what that means up to you, but my conservative guess as to what this means is she was crippled and made immobile. Irina has the same crippling ailment, seemingly not allowing her to stand. Skipping ahead along her questline after she is killed by Lautrec, we can resurrect her by bringing her firekeeper's soul back to Firelink Shrine, and she regains the power of speech, but remains repentant even in this state.
Thank you. Thank you. I am Anastasia of Astora. Now now I can continue my duty as a keeper. But I only hope that my impure tongue does not offend.
Anastasia sees herself as impure, like she has committed some great crime.
Frampt has told me of you, that you have agreed to link the fire. I thank you sincerely. Finally, the curse of the undead will be lifted, and I can die human.
Despite her melancholy, Anastasia reinforces the focus of her home to link the fire. This quest is held by many relatives of Astora to be of paramount importance, that the continual linking may one day reverse the undead curse and allow them to perish as humans. While Astora may believe that this quest strengthens them, all it shows us that they have a grave misunderstanding of the fire itself, and that they will never be freed of their curse. Regardless of this, they will continue to pursue the prophecy of the chosen undead. In a way, they represent a madness, a crucial failure of humankind to continue choosing the same unsuccessful method over and over again. Whether Anastasia was a firekeeper before she came to Lordran is unknown. It would be interesting to find out, since the act of being a firekeeper is looked down upon with derision by some figures, namely Knights of Karim like Egon. Something worth touching on briefly is the Maiden of Thurland, Rhea. I never believed Thurland to be an actual place, but rather a province or duchy of a larger land like Astora, ruled over by a family. If we compare Rhea's maiden set to Anastasia's dingy set, we can see that they are actually identical, save for the dirtiness on the latter's clothing. I believe it's possible that Rhea could be from Astora as well, though much more well off than Anastasia, seeing as she has her own armoured escort. It is interesting that no bond or connection exists between them. It would not be difficult for Rhea to find Anastasia and comment on her plight. Instead, she stays bound to her own duty and offers no sympathy to the condemned firekeeper. Perhaps Astora maidens shun those who have been blasphemous and shunned by the way of white. Something that ties both maidens together is Rhea's dialogue, and a cut dialogue for Anastasia. Varia Nox, which translates roughly to "I fear the night." Let's continue. While many Astora natives follow the teachings of the Way of White, certain individuals apply their belief to more particular sects of Lordran. One such individual is Solaire of Astora. While Oscar most likely came from a noble family who had the means to forge strong weapons and armor to arm their knights with, Solaire seems to be much more of a solitary character, illustrating a disparity between the haves and the have-nots of Astora. Let's take a closer look. As I stated before, I don't believe that Astora is a traditional monarchy like Lothric, but a land ruled over by several powerful families. If this estimation is true, then Solaire does not fit in with this societal setup. He is likely to be a rogue, depending on his own strength rather than anything else. Let's have a look at this by comparing two shields from Astora, the Dragon Crest Shield and the Sunlight Shield. The description of the Dragon Crest Shield reads, "Shield of a nameless knight, likely a high-ranked knight of Astora. One of the enchanted blue shields, the Dragon Crest Shield greatly reduces fire damage. Again, the shield is recognized by its craftsmanship. It has an enchantment and bears a dragon crest different from Oscar's." The description of the Sunlight Shield reads, "Shield of Solaire of Astora, Knight of Sunlight. Decorated with a holy symbol, but Solaire illustrated it himself, and it has no divine powers of its own. As it turns out, Solaire's incredible prowess is a product of his own training and nothing else." We can see here a disparity between the classes within Astora. Solaire, with no blacksmith at his disposal like Oscar had, was forced to create and design his own gear. Miyazaki himself says in the Design Works interview that the armor and gear of Solaire had to have a mismatched, almost handmade look. The shield has no enchanted properties and is essentially just a piece of steel. Much of Solaire's questline is unrelated to understanding Astora as a whole, but is nevertheless worth talking about for this investigation. I want to progress through this investigation of Astora chronologically in terms of Dark Souls, but I think it is relevant now to point out part of the description of the iron bracelets in Dark Souls 3, which read, "Durable iron bracelets protecting the wearer's wrists, said to be the bracelets of a Knight of Sunlight from a previous age. has no particular powers but are of fine quality and evidently well taken care of. It's interesting that this game points out that they were used by a knight from a previous age. This could, of course, be in reference to the fact that a cycle has passed since Dark Souls 1, but could also be in reference to the fact that so much time has passed since Astora was a land of stability. Just thought I'd throw that in there. A small tidbit of Astora lore, yet worth mentioning nonetheless, is Undead Prince Ricard. Ricard wears the elite knight set of Astora, just like Oscar and Henri, but wields a rapier and a bow as opposed to a straight sword. Ricard's backstory also helps us understand where Astora is located geographically in relation to Lordran, and that the prophecy of the chosen undead is not only limited to knights of Astora. We find Ricard in one of the towers in Sen's fortress, and is immediately hostile towards you. His skill with a rapier is admirable, and its pairing with a small metal buckler is actually historically accurate from a swordplay point of view. From the 17th to 19th centuries, the rapier was a highly utilized weapon by noble classes in Europe, and was affectionately referred to as the Queen of Weapons in its time due to its speed, grace, and careful workmanship. The rapier became synonymous with dueling and established itself as a much more refined weapon than traditional swords. What makes Ricard fascinating is the description of Ricard's rapier throughout the series. Let's have a look at the description from Dark Souls 1. A rapier with intricate decorations, chosen weapon of the infamous undead Prince Ricard. Ricard's exploits are told in a monomyth. He was born into royalty, but wandered the lands in a fateful ill-conceived journey. He became undead and disappeared up north. What should catch the eye before analysing the rest of the description is the mention of a monomyth. I believe the term monomyth was first coined by American mythologist Joseph Campbell, who discovered that throughout the world, different cultures that never came into contact with each other shared a common basis for folklore and told stories. The collection of similarities between stories, namely the giving of a quest, initial refusal of duty, undertaking of the mission, eventual victory and return with the boon or reward, became known colloquially as the hero's journey. The way I interpret the line, Ricard's exploits are told in a monomyth, is that people from many different lands tell Ricard's story differently, though with a similar basis and pattern throughout all of them. I believe that's a very interesting way of discussing the story of Dark Souls, and explains how the truth can become muddled after the same tale has been told many times by many different people. It's really interesting to see that Ricard seems to have somewhat of a celebrity status within the confines of Dark Souls and is considered famous, or infamous rather, most likely due to the fact that this well-prepared and well-known knight failed in his own hero's journey. Something else that I find interesting is that Ricard disappeared up north, perhaps implying that geographically Astora lies to the south of Lordran. It might seem pointless to some, but understanding the physical geography of Dark Souls is something that interests me, as I'm planning on constructing a map of the Dark Souls world sometime in the future. Something curious is that in Dark Souls 2, Ricard's rapier has a slightly different appearance, and its item description helps us to theorize why. It reads, an exquisitely decorated rapier, said to belong to a prince who appears in an ancient tale. There are numerous variations of the story of the prince who wandered the lands and eventually became undead. The majority of these tales end in tragedy, but there are some exceptions. Here we see the theme of the monomyth being expanded on by From. The monomyth of Prince Ricard's journey is likely split between different adventures taken by different people. In other words, even though the weapon is called Ricard's rapier, it is unlikely that it belonged to the real Ricard. I think that's really interesting that From keeps this storytelling motif in play throughout the whole series. Ricard's story is concluded somewhat in Dark Souls 3 as the rapier champion encountered as a summon in Archdragon Peak. Now, what probably confused many of you when you encountered this summon is the choice of clothing: Wolnir's crown, a loincloth, Cornyx's wraps, and the rapier. Could this be one of the stories that did not end in tragedy for quote-unquote Ricard? I suppose one way of looking at this could be that the NPC is somewhat like the soul of Cinder, from the perspective that instead of it being a manifestation of all the people who attempted to link the flame, it is a manifestation of all the different cultural interpretations of undead Prince Ricard through the world of Dark Souls, but that's a stretch. Since this video is actually about Astora, let's get back on track. We have discussed how the land of Astora is gifted with talented smiths, but let's take some time to talk about more direct examples of this. As most of you would guess, Andre of Astora is key to this understanding. However, it's also worth discussing other peripheral technologies developed. For instance, the binoculars, which have a description that reads, "Binoculars made of brass, used to peer at distant scenery. This advanced device was built by a famous craftsman of Astora. Its utility is singular, but its applications many. The value of these specs depend greatly on the imagination of their owner." In the real world, the invention of binoculars in the 17th century were a great leap in technological application. Considering that Dark Souls is at max set within a Middle Ages/early Renaissance context, the presence of binoculars and their place of origin in Astora goes to show just how advanced certain elements of this kingdom must have been in its heyday. As for the creators of these binoculars, they are attributed to a famous craftsman. Curiously, the name of Andre's hammer in Dark Souls 1 is Blacksmith's Hammer, while in Dark Souls 2 it is referred to as Craftsman's Hammer. Make of this what you will, but it is interesting seeing how it is the only reference to a craftsman throughout the series, as far as I know. Andre tells you himself that he is from Astora and is a skilled blacksmith able to work with several embers. Andre himself is undead, like Oscar, which continues to show the extent of how the undead curse affected Astora. Andre says to you,
"It's fine to be undead, but keep a level head, eh?"
Andre sees his undead state as somewhat of a blessing, like other characters in Dark Souls. What is interesting is that Andre does not speak of the Way of White or any religious institution. He does, however, speak of other blacksmiths, such as the Divine Blacksmith, who we discover in a petrified form in Darkroot Garden, and the Giant Blacksmith, who we can find in Anor Londo. Andre speaks in reverence of these other blacksmiths, implying an appreciation for their mutual craft. I think it's important to note at this point that many civilizations and their stages of advancement move on a mostly horizontal plane until the surplus of food is established, or in other words, when a society's primary focus shifts away from providing food to their people. After this stage, secondary and peripheral focuses can be expanded upon, such as engineering, advanced masonry, and literacy. This is perhaps most easily understood within the context of ancient Egypt, a society that began as hunter-gatherers, but the acquisition and understanding of the Nile's seasonal flooding allowed a surplus of crops and agricultural expansion to occur. By the 4th dynasty, around 540 years after the beginning of ancient Egypt, the civilization entered a golden age, and the easy availability of life-sustaining elements allowed for different interests to flourish, including mathematics, libraries, and advanced construction. While Astora's beginnings were probably not as meteoric, the fact that it did grow to such an influential degree is seen through seemingly unimportant facts like blacksmiths and technology. In Dark Souls 2 and 3, which we will discuss in more detail now, Astora is portrayed as more of a forgotten and desolated land. Tales have been forgotten and misconstrued, as have the names of the legends that graced the once powerful kingdom. However, many clues remain as to why Astora collapsed, and even more detail about the society can be gleaned by the keen-eyed. Let's have a look. The Elite Knight set, worn by Ricard, Henri, and Oscar, all Astora natives, can be found in Dark Souls 2, sold by Morlin, a travelling merchant. The description reads, "Armor made of Braden steel, provides sturdy defense, making it an old-time favorite of elite knights. Braden steel is used widely in Drang Lake. This fine alloy is made from ores mined in the Southern Kingdom." The description is standard fare, apart from a very interesting point that Braden steel is used widely in Drang Lake, and that it is mined from the Southern Kingdom. We already know that Astora most likely lies to the south of Lordran, so it could be the land referenced. How I interpret this is that the steel is of such a sturdy quality that word of its effectiveness travelled outside the bounds of Astora and to Drang Lake, where it found usage in the hands of many warriors. The fact that Astora's worth is not limited to within the kingdom itself is very interesting to me, and I'm glad that FromSoft worked this into the lore of the story. The Elite Knight set from Dark Souls 3 offers us more information and helps us understand a little about Astora's fall. The description reads, armor said to have been given to Elite Knights of fallen Astora. The mere mention of Astora invoked wistful pangs, and perhaps it is such a dream that drew Anri to this faraway home known only by name. Fallen Astora. I wanted to hold back on the concept of Astora's downfall for the majority of this so we could focus on what it was like during its peak, but the clues to its collapse are actually referenced as early as Dark Souls 1, in an item that is in every installment of the series. The description of the Ring of the Evil Eye in Dark Souls 1 reads, according to legend, this ring contains the spirit of the Evil Eye, a dark beast which assaulted Astora. The strength of the Evil Eye does not waver, and HP is absorbed from fallen enemies. The ring is found in the depths below Undead Burg. How it got there is anyone's guess, but from this we know Astora was destroyed or at least badly devastated by a dark beast or dark spirit. Before we discuss this further, let's have a look at the ring descriptions from the second and third games. In Dark Souls 2, the description reads, a modest but inexplicably disturbing ring. Absorb HP for each enemy defeated. Peer too closely at the rare stone that forms the eye of this ring, and things that writhe and stir may come into focus. And in Dark Souls 3 it reads, this ring captured the foul spirit of an evil eye, a creature that ravaged Astora. Absorb HP from each defeated foe. The horrid spirit nearly destroyed Astora, but was eventually defeated by the sword of one most noble. One thing that runs consistently throughout all these rings is that the wearer regains life force or HP by slaying enemies. Imagine that concept but contained within the instincts of a monster that has to kill to survive. Applying this ferocity to a beast attacking a kingdom like Astora creates a very real and tangible threat to even the most formidable of armies. The most interesting among the descriptions is definitely the ring from Dark Souls 3, which expands upon the assault and how it was dealt with. It seems that presumably a knight, or the sword of one most noble, defeating the spirit, and trapped it within the ring, subduing its malevolence. Curiously, Anri of Astora, who we will be discussing in detail shortly, gives you the Ring of the Evil Eye during his or her questline. Could Anri have been the one to slay the Dark Spirit? I suppose it's possible, though it could have also been a relative, and the ring has been passed down through the generations. As stated in the description from Dark Souls 3, the beast did not destroy Astora, but clearly did a lot of damage to the land itself. This event must also have taken place long ago before the events of Dark Souls 1, due to the fact that the ring has been in every game so far. This basically disproves any theory that Anri was responsible for the beast's destruction. That being said, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. In terms of other relics from Astora that have survived the ages, we also have the Sun Sword from Dark Souls 2, which has a description that reads, a well-forged longsword, of unknown origin and exhibiting no special power but sturdily crafted. Perhaps it does not live up to its name, but nevertheless, merely wielding this sword seems to cause warmth to well up within one's bosom. As most of us know, this blade is what remains of Solaire's weapon, a lightly decorated iron sword. The description reiterates much of what we already know, how Solaire's skill in combat was largely attributed to intense training and not much else. The same goes for the description of the weapon in Dark Souls 3, which reads, straight sword imbued with the strength of lightning. This featureless longsword contains the very power of the sun, perhaps is a relic of one-sided adoration. Again, this we already know, but I intend to cover everything Astora related. Let's continue. The Astora Greatsword is a new addition, only seen in Dark Souls 3 thus far, and is the lightest of all Ultra Greatswords in the game. The description reads, this greatsword bestowed upon only elite knights is a relic of the ruined land of Astora. Designed for a focus on thrust attacks, this sword is hard and sharp, but not unusually heavy. I find it interesting that weight is an element taken into account of the design of this sword. A lighter greatsword makes it more applicable to more knights and less dependent on the strength of the user. Perhaps this is due to the possibility that the aforementioned Braden steel could have been used to forge this sword, but this is difficult to prove. Something a bit more interesting and related to this investigation would be the Astora Greatsword as it appears in Dark Souls 3. The description reads, a well-crafted sword named after a ruined land. Astora, before its fall, was a land replete with royal blood, and this weapon is both a reminder and heirloom of this era. This weapon really encapsulates what we have been talking about so far with this video. Astora is gone, ruined, lost. The only remaining elements of this kingdom are in the scattered equipment and characters throughout the world of Dark Souls. From my point of view, the fact that the land was replete with royal blood lends credence to the theory that Astora was not a land of a single royal family, but several. We may as well use this opportunity to segue to Anri's character, since he or she carries a variant of this straight-sword. For convenience, I'll be referring to Anri as if it is a male character, as my first Dark Souls 3 character was female, making Anri canonically male for my playthrough. In Dark Souls 3, we get to meet Anri of Astora and his travelling companion Horus the Hushed. Anri wears the elite knight set that we have already talked about and is armed with Anri's straight-sword and the crest shield, the same as Oscar's from Dark Souls 1. While I stayed away from discussing other questlines of Astora natives like Solaire, I feel that it is required that we have to have a look at Anri's quest to a degree. Anri is unkindled like the player character and is tasked with returning the Lords of Cinder to their thrones. At the same time, Yuria of Londor also is preparing for Anri to become your spouse as Lord of Hollows, should you choose to undertake that questline. The most important and relevant part to all of this, however, is Anri's personal journey involving Horus and Aldrich. For this investigation, the rest isn't really that important. The description of Horus's executioner set reads, "Steel armor of Horus the Hushed, who took a liking to its cold, bulky insides." The original owner was said to be a corrupt executioner who was killed and stripped of his armor. Horus is one of the only two children to escape Aldrich's clutches. It is said of Aldrich in Dark Souls 3 that he was a cleric who became a Lord of Cinder and a devourer of gods and men. At some point, it seems, Aldrich also devoured children. Whether Anri was in Astora when he narrowly escaped Aldrich or somewhere else is unknown. The same goes for Horus, since it is unknown whether or not he is from Astora himself. Anri never makes reference to a family like Oscar does, despite them having almost identical gear. This, paired with his pairing with Horus and their narrow escape as children, almost makes me think that he is an orphan, though that is just speculation. Let's take a look at Anri's sword. The description of Anri's straight-sword reads, "Sword precious to Anri, another unkindled. The dullest type of blade found in the ruined land of Astora. Only, it was once the sword of an earnest, noble figure, and its attacks are boosted by that elusive, essential property unique to humans. Luck. It would seem that this blade is not a freshly forged sword or even a well-kept relic of Astora. This blade is old, dull, and most likely did not belong to Anri originally, but an earnest, noble figure. Who could that be? Could it be Oscar? Your guess is as good as mine, since Astora was replete with nobility. It is curious that the sword relies not upon sharpness or strength or even speed, but rather on luck, a trait specific to humans. I think this is apt, as luck has most likely been key to many of our Soulsborne playthroughs, especially our first, I imagine. I've stated previously, and I'll say it again, the most interesting factor about Anri to me is why he carries the Ring of the Evil Eye. This is not only a very important part of Astora's history, but also an item of danger and malevolence. I suppose one connection that we could make is that Anri's straight-sword may have been used by the Earnest Noble One to slay the dark spirit that ravaged Astora, since it was killed or trapped by the sword of the Most Noble. This puts Anri in possession of two pieces of Astora's history. How these items came to be in Anri's possession is anyone's guess. I suppose one possibility is that these two heirlooms have been passed down not through family, but as payment and thanks. Consider this: after aiding Anri with Horus, he gives you the Ring of the Evil Eye, entrusting you with its power. Similarly, after helping Anri defeat Aldrich, the source of his suffering, he gives Lordleth of Corland his sword, presumably to give to you.
Ah, well met, that at last returned. Know'st thou the name Anri of Astora? The brave lad left this as thanks. Though gave no elucidation, now heed this little warning from this little lord. He knoweth his fate, what will become of him upon his duty's end. He would not wish thee follow him.
Henri is passing down these gifts to you, so that the memory of Astora shall not fade from the minds of the living. What we are treated to next, should you proceed to Henri's final quest point, is one of my favourite elements of Soul's storytelling, both tragic and moving. If you travel to the outside of the Cathedral of the Deep and up the hill near the bonfire, you will find the last knight of Astora. The last in a long line of knights standing over a grave. Alternatively, Henri will be found at Horus's location of death, standing over Horus's possessions. On the grave lies the crest shield of Astora, emblazoned with a beautiful emblem. This is not just a knight's grave, but a spot where the memory of this ancient land is put to rest. Upon seeing you, Henri becomes hostile, attacking you with nothing but a broken straight sword. With a few strikes, Henri falls, and a bleak silence falls across the world. Henri falls under his grave with his honour intact, gifted a final battle before death. I think with that we can conclude this investigation. It's been really great taking a very close look at Astora, and I'm glad that I have a much more comprehensive understanding of its machinations than ever before. I hope that you will feel the same way, and that repeated journeys through Lordran, Drang Lake, or Lothric will be made richer by this video. If I manage to miss anything, please let me know, and I'll be glad to make necessary amendments. As always, if you'd like to discuss lore with me, feel free to message me on Twitter or Facebook. Until next time.